we're at the 64K IBM PC era of the microcomputer. People are still trying to figure out how everything works.
We have to relearn how to use this type of tool before we know how to be productive with it.
Vibe writing is absolutely a thing.
It's a place in which full autonomy can be fulfilled today.
We've changed our view of excellent because we wanted more access.
Is the bar for success what people can do today, or is the bar for success just something that's better than the alternative? Of course, this is dramatically better.
Anish, Steven, we were having such a good conversation offline that I wanted to get this on the podcast. There are a few topics we wanted to discuss. First, we were all fascinated by Andrej Karpathy's talk at Startup School. Steven, what did you find so interesting, or what were your takeaways or reactions from it?
Well, I totally love the talk. He did an unbelievable, like a philosopher king version of where we are. And I just found his metaphors really compelling. In fact, what I might do is even take it further back and just say, since he used an analogy of like where we are in computing, and lots of people are talking about the Windows 3 era and stuff like that, and having lived through all of them, I tend to think we're at the 64K IBM PC era of the microcomputer. And the reason I think that is actually a technical one, which is that we're at the point where people are still trying to figure out how everything works. And all the coding and all of the energy is working around like these very basic working problems. Like with the PC, it was like, okay, we have 64K of memory and our programs are all too big and we have no display and all these problems. And with AI, people are like, it's going to replace search, it's going to replace Excel, and it's going to replace all these things, but it doesn't add very well. It gives you a lot of errors. Like the thing that you say it's going to do, it just doesn't even do yet. So I feel like we're at a point that is just so early. And he did a fantastic job of sort of making that arc.
The thing that struck me the most was he talked a lot about our relationship with this new tool. And in a sense, we want to use it like in the same way that we've used all the other computing tools and technologies we've used in the past. But he really talked about this kind of inversion of the relationship of LLMs as people spirits, the fact that they have jagged intelligence. So to me, that sort of meta point he made was one of the most interesting. We have to relearn how to use this type of tool before we know how to be productive with it.
And I think tools is a super interesting point because the talk is anchored in tools, but the world itself is anchored in tools. And the early stages of a platform are always about tools. And so you kind of could get a little confused. Like right now, of course, he was talking about vibe coding, clearly, because he pioneered the term, invented the concept, and is living it. And it's very interesting because I actually think coding is one domain that always works best early in a platform because, well, all the customers of the platform are developers and they're going to make their tooling kind of work and come along. But I really think that the most interesting thing for me, what's being underestimated in the near term, is sort of vibe writing. And I mean, it seems weird to say anything with AI is underestimated because Lord knows that's not where we are.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that vibe writing is so here. Like if you're in college, you're already vibe writing. And, businesses are still working through well, can we use this? This doesn't seem appropriate. And that's a thing I've definitely lived through with word processors, with the I had to get permission from the dean in college to use a computer to write papers. And but this vibe writing is absolutely a thing. And it is really, really no different than when calculators showed up and all of a sudden just doing math homework involved using a calculator. And people are like, well, you're not going to know how to do math in the future. And it's like, I won't have to know how to do math. That's like the whole point of a tool. Like I have a power drill, so I do not know how to use like one of those Amish drill things. Like, and the world moves up the stack. And so that's where we are. And it's just super exciting.
What I love about the vibe writing concept actually is it's a place in which full autonomy can be fulfilled today. So you can ask the model to vibe write something, really detailed and compelling, and it'll do a great job. Whereas with vibe coding, I think there's a ton of constraints as to what the model can actually do versus what it can conceptually do. And understanding those boundaries and constraints is going to define a lot of the text to code stuff for the next 2 years.
Well, I'd push back a little bit on that because of course I agree on the coding side. And I think there's a lot of developers. One of the things developers do early in a platform is they love to tell you that they're doing something every day and it's working, but it actually just isn't. And that's just what happens early in a platform. They tell you all these things that they say are easy, and they're actually not. And they're spent 18 hours struggling with something that didn't work. But on the vibe writing side, it also hits a point that I just think is so, so important, which is, yeah, you can prompt it to spew out a bunch of stuff. But like if you have a job and your salary depends on you submitting that, or you're a student and your grade depends on you submitting that, it actually better be right. And you can't just like say, look, I vibe wrote this and here you go. And I think people don't get confused when it comes to like math. Like everybody knows you have to go check the math if you ask it to do a table and then add a column that does math. But we're going to just see endless human wasn't in the loop vibe writing things. And it's just that with programs, you can't really see that right away, because in order to actually distribute it or get someone to use it, you have to at least fix the initial bugs. We'll only see them later when there are security bugs, authentication bugs, passwords stored in plain text, or a zillion other problems that are going to happen from vibe coding.
I mean, in a sense, we've seen this already, right? We saw a bunch of lawsuits that were citing case precedent from cases that don't exist. So maybe this is actually the operative point, which is there's full autonomy, there's partial autonomy. Maybe partial autonomy in writing is moving us from writer to editor, but you still have to be the editor.
Yeah, we should also give him credit. I mean, many people have talked about this, but he did a fantastic job using the Iron Man analogy of how we're going to have, you know, a autonomy, partial autonomy, and a slider to control what you want. I actually think that's a fantastic analogy and a way of thinking it that gives you a very clear picture from the movies. You live through the movies, but at the same time, it's still people are very, very aggressive on their timeline of agents. And there's a very, very long history in trying to automate things that turn out to be very, very difficult to automate. And so I think that one, he did a fantastic job. He said, people are talking about like the year of agents. Yeah, that's a good consultant phrase. Just like he said, we're in the decade of agents, and it's going to take a decade for things to be anywhere near living up to agentification as a meme.
You know, it's an interesting point. I think a lot about agents as applied to financial services. And I think there's a set of problems in financial services that are high friction, low judgment. So for example, when I want to go refinance my personal loan, I don't really feel attached to any specific brand of a personal loan provider. I just want the cheapest rate. So it's actually a very low judgment decision, but going and researching and applying for a personal loan is a high friction process. That's something I would love to delegate to an agent. I think it can do a nice job. Whereas doing my taxes, wow, like, Steven, how much risk do you want to take on your taxes? How many things do you want to report or not report? That requires an enormous amount of judgment. And of course, it also is high friction. So when I think of the 2x2 of where is automation going to come first, I think a lot about high friction, low judgment.
I want to build on that because I actually think it's super important to also consider that for anyone to offer the alternatives to the market, there has to be an ability to differentiate, to explain. And so you end up with this kind of thing where like, I just want the cheapest flight. And of course, for 20 years, all of the flight searches and stuff has worked on the cheapest, but it turns out that's not actually what you want.
That's right.
Plus, a lot of people want to intervene in presenting your choices to you.
Yes.
And so I don't like this idea that all choice in life is going to be reduced to some headless API.
Right.
I don't understand. People have to go build that and make a living building those things. So to your example of like refinancing a home,
yes,
like the only reason that it can exist as a search problem today is because the different people who want to refinance you can target you with an ad and attract you as a customer and differentiate themselves on that offering.
Right.
And if you can't do that, then your ability to actually automate that task isn't going to exist because there's no economic incentive to just be, hi, I'm the headless, faceless, nameless, low price mortgage leader.
That's
It's
right.
not really a business. Like there's
right.
nothing there. Just like, you know, headless, faceless, nameless food isn't a thing. It doesn't show up in a white can labeled food. And then you consume it and you're okay, all good. I have food now.
Well, maybe Soylent, but yes.
In the future, in the dystopian future of Repo Man, that's where we end up, but that's not going to happen.
I want the cheapest flight as long as it's not on Spirit Airlines.
Right. I want the cheapest flight, but I'm traveling with a family of 3. I don't want to leave at 5 a.m.
No red eye.
Yeah, like it's just, I want miles on this airline.
Yes,
A lot of things don't add up to that. And this is a real thing in business. It's a thing on the producer and the consumer side. Consumers really, really want much more choice than they often think they do. And anyone who's bought anything on Amazon knows they complain about the choice, but they really don't want just, like phone case to show up as the thing because it was $6.
I think this is a real through line through the talk, which is partial autonomy, jagged intelligence. Karpathy is just talking a ton about the constraints of the technology, which I think is the right thing for us to be thinking through trade-offs around as builders.
And he does a great job, very much as this philosopher that I love. His delivery, his tone, you really, really don't just go read the summaries, don't read a post, go just watch the video immersively.
Totally. Well, I want to get to automation and sort of employment, particularly on the entry level side. But first, I just want to ask the broader question of, there was this idea of, like AI plus human. I think it was chess could beat AI for some period of time, and that was kind of the co-pilot view of the world. Of human plus AI will have a better product. And then it turned out, I think it was chess, maybe it was Go, or maybe it was both. That actually that was a temporary thing, and AIs are just better. And so then there's the question as to how much of the world is like chess, where human plus AI is only better for a certain period of time, and then the models get better, or how much the world is like something else that is we're always going to want that human plus AI is just better, or we're just always going to want humans to do it.
Look, my view is that in a domain in which you have a formal definition of correctness, the path will be no autonomy, partial autonomy, full autonomy. In domains where you don't have a formal definition of correctness, or where a ton of human judgment is necessary and human choice and sort of a human direction, the right product design is not to go all the way to full autonomy. I would argue that chess and Go do have a formal definition for correctness, so it makes sense that those were fully automated over time.
We're back to the early stages of where things are, which means that a bunch of programmers are sort of defining what success looks like. And programmers are very good at either works or it doesn't work, or I just want to automate this, or I'm going to reduce your job to a tiny shell script kind of mentality. And I just look at the world as everything is gray, and everything is much harder than it looks when you don't actually have to do it. Ages and ages ago, I visited a really giant hospital in Minnesota to help them figure out how to use Excel within the medical profession. And the doctor just looked at me and he's like, I don't think you understand. He was like, my job is all uncertain. Every aspect of what I do is uncertain. So adding something that pretends to be certain, like a spreadsheet, to my uncertainty doesn't actually help me. Mm-hmm. And so fast forward, first I've spent 25 years with a doctor, but that's a different, but if there was a story this week about radiologists. And so very early in actually, if you go to ImageNet, everybody was immediately, radiology is doomed. Like there was, you never need to get a skin cancer biopsy. You'll just take pictures of your mole and it will just tell you. And then you find out, wow, there's judgment there. And there's even judgment in doing the biopsy and how to do the biopsy and then what to biopsy and all this. And so but it turns out the radiologists have fully embraced AI, but they embraced it as no different than they embraced the latest MRI technology or the latest software update from GE for a CAT scan. And I just think there are so many things like that. And so many jobs are either very, very uncertain, or most of the job is basically exception handling.
Right.
And like people are like, oh, we're going to automate our taxes. Okay. Taxes are literally a giant cascading if and switch statements of exceptions.
Yes.
And so the idea that you will just automate that, well, you have to know the answer to all the exceptions. And if you're going to prompt it with the answer to all the exceptions, then you're doing your taxes manually. So it's a very strange, it's sort of like everybody, once you reach a certain income, you have to get help from an accountant to do your taxes. And the first thing the accountant does is ask you for your tax planner. And as a software person, I look at it, I'm like, the task planner really, really looks like the input fields of the software you're using. So if maybe I could just buy that software and then type it in. And I said that, and he's like, well, you're welcome to, but you will go to jail. And he explains, like, because every time I give him a number is a whole decision about where to apply it. Does it work? And I'm like, well, you're not really a farmer, so don't fill anything in on that form and stuff like that. So it's people get automation is extremely difficult. And it's exception bound, it's judgment bound, and it's all uncertain.
You know, a field in which this question comes up a ton is product management. I've had so many conversations with product managers over the last 2 years about the death of product management. It's the end of the field. Why do we need PMs? And I think, you know, our sort of developer generation has developed a real resentment towards product managers, which is a different conversation. With that said, I think that the product management job is the job of addressing ambiguity. And it's ambiguity that prevents progress from being made. Sometimes it's execution, decision-making, product design. That will not change. The nature of business and human interaction and companies is these complex adaptive systems where there will always be ambiguity. I think you'll always need judgment, and you'll always need somebody who looks like a product manager.
Yeah, I think that really gets to the sort of the vibe coding sort of challenge we're dealing with, which is like, how fast can we go text to app? And I think, you know, here, what's so interesting in the long arc of platform transitions is that we're also having this platform transition happen not just out on the open. You know, we've had that before. Like back when in the earliest days of computing, these platform transitions happened in user group meetings, like at the Coverly Community Center down the street, or in magazines or in newsletters, and then with news groups, then the internet, and so on. You know, the whole internet was all ICQ and it was all in the open. But now it's like happening on CNN, on the nightly news. You know, everyone knows about the platform transition that's happening, in particular on social and in Discord. And so what's happening is you're getting a lot of like vibe coding for clout. And so you're getting a lot of this, like, I had an idea, I prompted it, and it worked. And here I am. And I, you know, at some point I just go like, I'm calling BS on that. That's like not a thing. And then I sound like an old person. And because some people think I am, I don't, but some people think I am.
I don't either.
You know, it looks like, hey, you know, you're just being old.
Yes.
But then you dig in and you find out like, wow, your prompting, although it's English-like, it turns out you're just programming.
Yes.
And you're just programming in prompts.
Yes.
And people are like, oh, this is what we're going to do is we're just going to get the model to require a little bit more structure. And I'm like, you're writing a new programming language.
Yes.
And we're just like this path of text to app and vibe coding is just developing a new language, which is super cool.
Yes.
Like, Lord knows, like the world is built on programming languages. In the 80s, if you drove slowly past a computer science department trying to get a PhD, they would just invent a new programming language right then and there if you stood outside the building for too short a time. But we can't lose sight of the fact that the arc of programming has been one of basically overpromise and underdeliver. You know, when I was in college, like the theory was the market was going to need so many programmers that the whole workforce would just be software people. And that never happened. And now here we are, we're not going to need any. They're all just going to go away. And I think it was extreme in 1990 and it's extreme today. And I think that the big thing is this over-promising at each transition, you know, even just most recently, low code.
Yes.
Who even says that word anymore? Like it's like we're not allowed to even mention it. And it's because like it's always the same thing, which is, yes, if all you're doing is a very straightforward app that looks like all the other straightforward apps, but with like a domain spin or a branding logo or something, you know, we see this with Wix and with website templates, like it's possible, but you're not going to run a company on any of those.
I totally agree. Where I disagree actually is I think that the language model in this case, but the language in your metaphor is improving at a dramatic rate underneath these things. So while I think almost all these products today, they're good at prototyping, they're trying to push into refinement, they're not really usable as things that you can actually deploy to production at all. In fact, most of the cool demos you see on Twitter don't work 3 days later. So they're very much in the prototyping phase, but the programming language and the metaphor is improving dramatically. I think we'll get there, or at least make more progress than we think. versus a traditional programming language like object-oriented. It didn't feel like it 100x the number of programmers or 1/100th the amount of time to ship something to production. We just got, new tools and sort of new problems to solve.
Well, of course, you're benefiting from hindsight.
Yes.
And that's a key thing. First, I agree. Like, we're in an exponential improvement cycle with the models.
Yes.
So any predictive power goes out the window.
Correct.
And anyone who says like something negative is just going to be like, you're going to be the next person who says the internet is going to be a passing fad like a fax machine. And that's you just don't want to be there. And it turns out also that's a case where, having lived through them, you get very shy about like making predictions because you see how foolish people look for a long time. But like take something like object oriented. I mean, this thing was hyped to the moon for how to solve something. This is a wave of programming languages. Just to give you an idea, again, how the speed things move. They started in 1980, and by 1990 they finally reached like peak hype. Right. So it was like 10 years of incremental improvement. And by then they were also over. Like any programmer would have kind of said, it's not really, it's sort of just changing the old programming model paradigms of abstraction and polymorphism and stuff like that. But meanwhile, the magazines, which was the key measure of success at the time, like there was one magazine that had a picture of a baby in diapers, not a picture, a drawing, on the cover, programming, how programming will get made easy. And it was like, and I'm like, I remember seeing it at the newsstand, and I was working on the C++ compiler at the time, which C++ was a brand new language in 1990, and it didn't work yet. And here was a baby who was going to make programming possible for other babies at baby care or something. And whether it was, that or all the database programming languages like Delphi or Power Builder, these are all, in algorithmic sense, they were all constant improvement. Like they added a constant factor, like +7 onto programming. None of them changed the mathematical
order of magnitude.
And I think that, like what I believe is, with writing right now, it's changing order of magnitude. And so we're here, it's happening. Accuracy isn't there. But one of the things about writing is, like, actually when you read it, most of it in business is not really accurate already. So it's very much like autocorrect. Like autocorrect fixed all the common typos like TEH to THE in English and just replaced them with these wild new autocorrects that just replaced what you typed with a word that has no meaning in the context of the sentence, which is what we face on phones all the time. So what we're going to see is a whole different set of errors in business writing or in academic writing in schools that just replace other errors that have always creeped in.
Totally. I remember Smalltalk was the hot language, right?
Well, Smalltalk was the start of it, and it was called Smalltalk 80.
Yes.
And then it really didn't ever achieve any momentum outside of Palo Alto.
Yes.
But then C++ came along.
Yes.
And there were 50 languages in the middle that people don't talk about. Like Objective-C being one of them. That was the iPhone language, which was really one Steve Jobs. There was Object Pascal and Pascal with a relational database attached. But this was my master's degree. Then I quit grad school. I could go on about this one for far too long, so I'll just stop now.
Do you think there will be best-selling novels that are, entirely AI generated or nearly entirely in the next few years?
100%. 100. And I don't think Stephen King is going to do that. But I think there'll be some new writer who will probably write it under a pseudonym. And a year after the novel is written and has been made into a movie, they'll say, oh, by the way, I got the plot idea from a prompt, and then I just started having writing, and I was editing it along the way. Absolutely. And the copyright suit that follows from training models and stuff, that's a different issue.
I think there's two things on this actually that are really interesting. So one is, these language models are these averaging machines. And with art, you almost definitely don't want the average of all the novels or all the writing or all the authors. You want something that's at the edge. So how do we actually point them in a direction such that they can be at the edge of culture, which I think is important for making great art? I think the other thing is a lot of the artists don't yet know how to use the new tools. And we're going to see artists that are native in the technology. Instead, what we're seeing a lot, out there, what's called the slop, has just been a lot of this low barrier to entry art that's being created, which is great because it gives people the sort of fulfillment of creative generation. I think what we're talking less about is, hey, how is the ceiling being raised for artists because they have access to these technologies?
without going all Duchamp on what is art, I mean, we all like bad sitcoms are part of society too. But I think it's important. We tend to focus on like the very, very best of things, but most everything isn't only the very best. In business writing, it's all slop.
Yeah.
I mean, this is why look, I've written a lot of business writing, so I can say this confidently about what I've written and what gets written. But like take something completely mundane that a lot of people in Silicon Valley spend a lot of time working on, like the enterprise software case study. I'm telling you, GPT generates better enterprise case studies faster than the typical marketing associate does at a company in like 1/1,000,000th the effort. And does the content need to exist? It actually does. It's just an important part of the selling process.
Yes.
And so just like with some, at the extreme, like with something like medical diagnosis, we tend to think about the most obscure diseases, the most difficult to understand problems with the finest hospitals, with the most resources. But you have to remember, like 80% of the world has no access to anything.
Yes.
So wherever you think of medical LLM is, as in the slop scale,
yes,
most people don't have access to anything average. So you have to, we have to just make sure that the whole debate does not center around, like what is the Francis Ford Coppola using as the book, and who are the actors, and who is the cinematographer? Because that corporate case study, well, they often go and interview the person and film it. Well, like all of a sudden we see it today. Those things are done over Zoom.
Yes.
So suddenly flying in with us, we're getting a satellite and booking. We've changed our view of excellent because we wanted more access. And I think that's absolutely going to happen. Should you get graded on slop in school? That's a different problem. But most stuff is pretty average.
The world needs more slop, says Steven.
I feel like this isn't a press interview where you can put words in my mouth like that.
The world needs more slop. That'll be the title.
Well, so actually, Mark makes this point. I think it's a really good one. Which is the bar for success perfection? Is the bar for success what people can do today, or is the bar for success just something that's better than the alternative? And in your case of 80% of the world that has access to no medical knowledge, no medical services, no medical opinion, of course, this is dramatically better.
Yeah, I look at it like when I had to get permission to use a word processor in college, one of the stumbling blocks was that my printer was like an Epson MX80 dot matrix printer. And it looked like a printer, like a computer printer, which like the rules for the papers were they had to be written on a typewriter.
Yes.
And so and then the Macintosh came out in the spring and only had an image writer, which is another dot matrix printer. So all of a sudden the standard changed because the value of being able to revise and edit and update and copy paste and use fonts was just so much higher than the fidelity of the teacher reading it on, bond paper with Courier. And that's going to happen with content as well.
What I would love to talk to you about, Steven, is actually just hearing your take on I/O. There was a lot of conversation around Google and how Google had sort of fallen behind and lost their ability to make new things. They released a ton of new software at every part of the stack in I/O. What do you think that says for Google, about Google? Do you think the sort of demise of Google is overstated?
Well, of course, I think the demise of Google is an absurd proposition. The demise of a giant company is a crazy thing to say. They will, driving in, I was listening on CNBC, some investor or whatever talking their book, talking about IBM and is the one to buy. I almost wanted to pull over to the side of the road and think, what universe am I in where this company that has died like 9 times in my career.
Right.
And so death of is just such a dumb thing. Losing a position of influence, however, is a very real thing. Mm-hmm. In these platform transitions, big companies have an enormous asset, which is the shock and awe asset. And so they have the ability to tell the story called, we're pivoting our whole company around this, and we're a $1 zillion company. And here is like a full assault across the board for every single asset we have and every single category the world is talking about that matters. And that's what you could do. And so it was totally predictable that Google would show up with like literally the B-2 bombers of software. But the question is really much deeper than that. And it's really, will they alter their context of how they build products and their go-to-market? Because that's really what undermines the big technology companies. And so what I'm looking at with Google is not like, can they present all the technologies in the context of Google search and ads, but can they transform the way they think to something new? Because that's really where the disruption is going to happen.
I love that point.
Awesome. Anish, Steven, thanks so much for this week in
Sure thing.
Thank you. Super fun.